Raya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Shamini Tinamane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pachanini Visesa Sunyavadi Paschatya Satarini Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shadvaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaura Bhaktivinoda. So we're going to talk about something I've talked about before, but the topic came up. It's not coming up on my page, mahatmadas.com.
On your Facebook, right?
Yeah, my Facebook, Mahatma Das. I have a few Facebook pages.
mahatmadas.com?
No. Facebook, Mahatma Das 1, I think it is. Gintare. What is the name of my Facebook? Is it Mahatma Das 1? Mahatma Das. You have the public page. Trying to get on here and he doesn't know how to get it. Somebody tell us.
All of the temple ones are there.
Why we're not on? Yeah, what?
This is temple.
That's an old one.
Yeah.
Why you're not getting it? I have no idea. They're all getting it.
It's the same account, because usually all the other ones which I just went. I just went on this one.
That's it.
And
should be there.
Usually it was always there.
Weird.
Every day I was posting from this one, but it's not coming up right now.
No, I don't know why.
Even this one is there. See, that's the.
I don't know why. This is the one. They're on. Yeah. So what's the site? Is this where it is? Is this what it's supposed to be? Because it's not coming on his phone. Is that the page with that picture? Can you see it? I can't even see it. That picture, is that the page? Or is there another page? That's the page as far as I know.
Yeah, because that's the one I've always, every day I was going on that page and posting it from there.
There's nothing on here. No. No, that's July. What do they say? They won't tell us. Maybe there's some trick to it.
Srila Prabhu as well is on.
I don't know.
Oh,
Yeah.
perfect. We are
There it is. Okay, we got it. Late. He's a latecomer.
Late.
Okay. All right. So we were speaking the other day. I don't know if you saw the class. We were speaking the other day about how Prabhupada put so much faith in the holy name that he would send devotees around the world, even though they're very new, and they would start temples. And he knew if they chanted, then everything would be good, and they would maintain their Krishna consciousness. So we were looking at the power of the holy name through Prabhupada's eyes, from his perspective, and I wanted to do the same on this topic. So let's put this in context. Prabhupada was part of the Gaudiya Matha. The Gaudiya Matha was his spiritual master's movement, and he helped it as a grihasta, and then he joined one of the Maths as a Vanaprastha and wanted them to sponsor him to come to America, but he couldn't get sponsorship. So he came to America, and not to start his own movement, he wanted to do it as part of the Gaudiya Matha. And still, when he was in America, he couldn't get help. So then he started ISKCON. So let's kind of put it in our own context. Imagine you were going to start spreading Krishna consciousness in some part of the world where there's 300 million people and no devotee's been there and people have never seen devotees. They don't know what it is. And imagine ISKCON has fallen apart. It's divided because of devotees couldn't get along, and ISKCON fell apart. And now instead of one ISKCON, there's 80 gurus, and maybe 50 of them started their own organizations, and maybe 30 of them stayed in ISKCON. So you have like 50 new organizations. And you go to Mayapur, and there's like 6 temples, each a disciple of Prabhupada. And you go to Navadvip, there's 6 temples, 10 temples, each a disciple of Prabhupada. And then you go around the Dham and you see other temples, each run by a disciple of Prabhupada. So imagine you lived through that. You saw ISKCON fractionize, and then you saw that ISKCON was no longer this big worldwide organization that it used to be. And now it's a fragmented organization that's doing a little preaching here and there, but it's not doing what it used to be. So imagine that's the scenario. And then you go to this new country and you spread Krishna consciousness, and it takes off and it becomes really big. And now you have this big organization. And you're making disciples, and they're starting to fight. What would you be thinking? They're not getting along. What would you be thinking? You're seeing the same thing with your disciples that happened with your godbrothers that destroyed a unified movement and that lost so much effectiveness and power. What would you be thinking? You'd be very concerned, wouldn't you, that the same thing could happen. We need to understand that context to understand things that Prabhupada said about working together. He's coming from a context in which he lived through a movement that fell apart because they couldn't get along together. I mean, just picture that happening to you, and how concerned you would be that in the movement you started, the same thing wouldn't happen. Does that make sense? And so Prabhupada in one letter said that if you don't cooperate, then the whole thing will fall apart. And he's saying, like, all my work will fall apart if you don't cooperate. It's not just me that I do the work, but you have to take it and spread it. And if you don't cooperate, then it's going to fall apart. So it was a plea. It was a plea to the devotees that in order to keep the organization from ending up like the Gaudiya Matha, and sometimes Prabhupada did refer to us becoming like the Gaudiya Matha, saying, don't be another Gaudiya Matha, in that sense, in the sense of not being able to be a unified movement. So he was, he had reason to push this point. And so I think it's just very interesting when we look at things Prabhupada said to kind of understand the context from which it came, because then it becomes more powerful, right? He said, if you don't cooperate, my work is stopped up. In other words, we're the media we're the via media for which Prabhupada's work goes on, the temples, the books, the instruction and so forth, whatever we're doing. And if we're not working well together, the machine's not working. So we're the machine. So Prabhupada many times asked us to get along, and obviously it's very difficult because we're all individuals, and this is where the challenge is, because many of us just don't think alike. We're so different. We just see things differently. And that's why it's sometimes so hard to be able to get along with everybody. And obviously Prabhupada knew that, and obviously he was pushing that, telling us again and again, because he saw how essentially important it is for the success of his movement. So that's I wanted to start with that thought, and I've spoken about this before, but I don't think I ever explained it from that angle of vision, of seeing it from a historical perspective. It's like when Bush wanted to go to war. Most European countries said no, and wanted to go to war with Iraq, and they didn't want to participate. And the main reason was they said, we have seen war in Europe. You've never seen it in American soil. We've seen it. It's such a horrible, traumatic, hellish reality that having lived through it, we are so reluctant to go to war. But you Americans, you're not so reluctant because all the wars were fought on foreign soil. That was one of the things they said. So I don't know if that switch is turned on. I don't think it is. So it's I don't know. No Shakti. I'm just trying to turn my computer on. So it's such a, when you've lived through something, a devastation, when you say, please cooperate, don't become another Gaudiya Matha, it has a different meaning than it had for us. I think part of the challenge we had is what we're more attached to doing things our way, or understanding things in our way than we were to figure out how we could get along with one another. So I see there's two aspects of relationship. I don't think anything happened. I think there's two aspects of relationship. One is the aspect of cooperating as an organization in order to further the mission. And the more effective we are working together, the more powerful and effective the mission, the more unified the mission, the better. Of course, that's easier said than done, because, as an organization, there's so many things we don't do correctly that we need to improve on, and it makes it difficult for devotees because we see things are going wrong. We're not all perfect. We don't always do things perfectly. Leaders are not always perfect, and it's not easy being part of an organization. I think that outlet, just wherever you have it plugged into, doesn't seem to be working. The fuse is blowing or something, I don't know. I was going to read something, but we plug the computer in, it's not turning on. So, we take it as a service to Prabhupada. I may not want to get along with you, but I do it because it's a service to Prabhupada. What happened?
This one's working. This one is on.
Maybe, let me see. Maybe it's not plugged in properly. Plug it in this way. There we go. That should be.
Maybe something's wrong with the phone.
I don't know what to say. Krishna doesn't want me to read this. Doesn't make any sense unless... No. Weird.
Let's try this charger. This is my charger. It's the same outlet, so
No, I don't know. You sure? No. And I was just charging my phone. I was just charging with this. It's not the charger. Maybe that one outlet's not working. Why don't you put it in there? Put it in that outlet. Yeah. Pressed it all the way in. Stay with me. Yeah, maybe now it's working. I don't know, it won't turn on. Usually when you plug it in, it turns white. It's charging. I don't know what to say. Okay. Oh yeah, it's turning on now. Okay. I solved the mystery. Because I have a recording studio, and this happens all the time. Something doesn't work, one outlet is broken, one cable. It's like Sherlock Holmes, you have to go through every connection. So we tried to work together as best we could because we knew that's what Prabhupada wanted, and we also knew, objectively speaking, that we needed to be able to work together to make things happen successfully. So, of course, and the other aspect of working together was just developing good relationships with one another, because that's important for our own bhakti. So we have these two aspects. So just give me a second, and I would like to read some things and discuss what Prabhupada has said about this. If I can find the document. This is going to be hard. Hold on a second. Bear with me. It'll be worth it. Don't go anywhere. Huh. Oh yeah, I found it. This is an article I wrote, and there's some nice quotes in it that I would like to read. I'll just read it and we'll discuss it. It is said that if you reach the top of a mountain alone, you didn't climb a very high mountain. This is because we can achieve much more by working in a team than working by ourselves. This is a definite fact. You all know this. Like sometimes some of us are very independent, we work alone, but if you can work well with a team, you have infinitely greater results. Srila Prabhupada said that he could not have spread the Krishna consciousness movement alone. Quote, "Nobody should think that I have got so great ability I can do. No. It is simply by cooperation we can do very big things. United we stand, divided we fall. We must be combined together." Sankirtan. Sankirtan means many men combined together chanting. So this is interesting, and I've mentioned this before, that Prabhupada on different occasions had said that he couldn't do it alone. He could only do it with the help of his disciples. Now, of course, we think it was only because of him. But Prabhupada, we could say is, you could say, okay, Krishna sent all those disciples to help him, so really, and it was he who inspired the disciples. Okay, that's true. But Prabhupada's looking at it from the perspective that on my own, without help, I wouldn't be able to do very much. I needed, even if you say Krishna sent these people and I empowered them, still I needed these people. So that's how Prabhupada looked at it. I needed you. I was just one man. So that's underscores Prabhupada's statement. And Prabhupada's saying we can't do it alone. He's even saying I couldn't do it alone. What speak of you? So there's really a balance there in how to keep independence in a unified organization. Because if it's dominant and autocratic, everyone loses their enthusiasm. And if it's completely independent, there's no unity, so there's a balance. And that's what we're trying to find, that balance, where we can be autonomous, because autonomy gives us inspiration, we can do our own thing, but we're working in a unified context. That's the balance. So Prabhupada spoke both. If we speak too much about unity, then it can become bureaucracy. Okay, we're going to be unified, and here are all the laws which will unify us. And it takes away individual initiative. And if it's anarchistic and everybody just does what they want, then you have no structure. And then you lose effectiveness. You lose the synergy that the structure gives you. So there's a balance. So Prabhupada wanted both. And we don't want to make the mistake. Sometimes we make the mistake on one side, or we make the mistake on the other side. Everyone should just do whatever they want, independent. Because Prabhupada indicated that. But he also indicated that we should work together. So they balance themselves. Have you heard anything about the idea of implementing an unconditional basic income into the human societies? No, I haven't. Could make people lazy, though, if you pay them for not working. As Gandhi said, wealth without work degrades a man. So, okay. Prabhupada wrote to a leader in ISKCON, let us try to work cooperatively, otherwise the fighting spirit will ruin our great movement. What's Prabhupada saying here? He's just saying, it's another way of saying, I've seen a great movement get ruined through the fighting spirit. And Prabhupada said at one time, he said they were fighting over little things like rooms. And, you don't need big things to fight over, right? That's a whole other discussion, huh? The fighting spirit, it doesn't have to be anything big, it's just, control. And one time, maybe it's in this article, one time they asked Prabhupada, why can't we get along? What's the problem? He said, the problem is you all want to be God. That's the problem. Let's rephrase that. Nobody wants to be humble. Everybody wants to be controller. Everyone wants to be in charge. Everyone wants to do it their way. That's what Prabhupada's saying. Why don't we get along? Ultimately, it's a lack of humility. We may not want to admit it, but that's what it is. What else could it be? Right? It's easier to say it's something else, because then we won't feel like we're failing. But ultimately, it's a lack of humility. Or maybe a lack of tolerance, maybe a lack of sympathy, or maybe all of them. But lack of humility has a big role in not being able to get along. Now the difference is we're not getting along with other devotees. Should we avoid this person, try to cooperate anyway? Even if we will be struggling. I think the main thing that Prabhupada's saying, at least in the context we're talking about, is in some cases you don't have a choice because you're working together. So it's like, and you have a seva and they have a seva and you're working, and you can't just leave and they can't just leave. if there's an option to make some division so you can both work peacefully, that's okay. You just don't want to offend one another. You can make division that's not division. There's there's a kind of division that's healthy, and there's a kind of division that creates factions. So you don't want to create a division that creates factions. You want to create a division that's healthy. Okay, gives you your space, gives the other person their space. But in some cases, you don't have that option. You just have to work within the system, because there may only be one system to work in some situations. So you have to learn how to work within that. And we all require a lot of tolerance to work within a big organization. And the bigger the organization gets, the more problems there are, because there's more people, and people create problems. Sometimes devotees say, sometimes we complain about ISKCON, but we're all part of it, so we're all responsible. So it could make it better, right? So look what Prabhupada's saying when he's asking us to get along. So maybe getting along means, like, for example, there was a little friction in one temple. There was a couple GBC in one temple, and I don't know the details, but one of the GBCs just said, "I will leave." Not that he was angry; it was because it was the best thing to do. I said, "I'll leave, and you just manage this project, because there's some friction. It's not working." And I don't think it was between them. I think it was other people that had a problem with it. So one of them just said, "Okay, I'll leave, you stay." And that was the best solution. So sometimes that may be necessary, but that was done out of humility, not out of not being able to work together. It was sometimes you'll be in a situation, it's not, people don't like you or don't like what you're doing, and the best thing is just to pull out. But that's an act of humility. So these are the kind of things that are required. Sometimes you have to let another person be in charge. Even you could do better. That happens. And these things are realities we have to learn how to deal with. So that's what Prabhupada's asking us. When Prabhupada's asking us to cooperate, he knows what it means. Now look at Prabhupada's example. This is so interesting. Yeah, well, let's go back a little bit. Cooperation doesn't mean if there's something wrong, you don't say anything or you don't try to rectify a situation. In a sense, I could say, if you see something wrong and you don't do something, then you're kind of guilty for not saying anything. So that's there also, but that doesn't mean you're not cooperating. But it's how you deal with those situations. If something's wrong, can you deal with it in a way that's not disturbing? Right? Now I forgot what I was going to say. Oh yes, now I remember. There's something very interesting about Prabhupada's willingness to work with his God brothers that transcended differences. That Prabhupada didn't see eye to eye with all his God brothers, especially what happened in the Gaudiya Matha and why it happened. Prabhupada had his opinion exactly. This is why it happened. You didn't form a GBC. You wanted to put an acharya in charge, and Srila Bhaktisiddhanta did not say to do that, but he said form a GBC, and but still there were these factions. No, we should put an acharya, and then they fought over which acharya it should be. So Prabhupada was trying to engage in preaching with the very people that did that. That's pretty interesting, isn't it? The very people that were responsible for the breakdown of Gaudiya Matha, he was still trying to encourage, let us preach together. He didn't allow that to get in the way. So that says a lot. That's an amazing example, I think. I don't even know if we can follow that example. But that's something to consider. That Prabhupada was, he had a vision to preach in which he wanted to preach within a unified organization, or create that unified, or unify the Gaudiya Matha again. And he was willing to overlook so many differences. That's a powerful example. In religious field, many people are not willing to overlook differences to be able to cooperate. They look at the differences and they focus on them. It's a reality. If you don't believe me, you can go online and see how different religious denominations of the same Christian religion speak about one another. And they're always, this preacher is condemning that preacher as not being biblical, which we would say that means not being Siddhantic. And this one is justifying his philosophy and criticizing the one who criticizes him. It's very, very common, and we see that in ISKCON as well, maybe on a smaller scale because we're not such a big movement and we don't have as much history as a movement, as a Christian church, but all the seeds are there. And then Prabhupada is coming and he's trying to engage members of the Gaudiya Matha in spreading Krishna consciousness all over the world. And he disagrees with many of them, and he's willing to engage with them. Don't you think that's interesting? I think that's a very important example. Like, how did he do that? What was Prabhupada thinking? Seems he was thinking that the preaching mission is most important. Important enough that we could put these other things, these other differences aren't so big. Don't let these differences get in the way. Don't let these differences deter us from successfully preaching. Don't let them become the dominant factor, but let's focus on giving Krishna consciousness in some way, cooperatively. So it seemed, therefore, that Prabhupada was very tolerant. He was willing to tolerate certain differences. Because, we all have the same philosophy. There may be some nuances of disagreement, but the basic principles are the same, and he was willing to overlook other things. So it does seem Prabhupada valued unity, had an extreme value for unity. Sometimes you can say, you don't want to value unity above the truth. But it seems in this instant, where Prabhupada was trying to engage God brothers that he had disagreements with, it seems that he put unity above the differences, because unity would make spreading Krishna consciousness more successful. And that was always what was on Prabhupada's mind. And let's look at this in another context. Prabhupada is always thinking how to spread Krishna consciousness. That's always on his mind. So when he's saying cooperate, it's just, okay, differences here and there, but just cooperate because we need to spread Krishna consciousness. That's the most important thing. Okay, you have this difference over this or that. It's not so important. Spreading's what's important. Let's if we can do that, then these differences, they're not such a big thing. If we do this, we're fulfilling the order of Guru. We're fulfilling the order of Mahaprabhu. This is what's most important. That's the message I get from Prabhupada's extreme level of tolerance of those he disagreed with. That we will tolerate that for the higher purpose of spreading Krishna consciousness. And that's what I see in those statements of Prabhupada asking us to cooperate. Hare Krishna. This higher principle. Yeah. Yeah. So here's another quote. This is a letter, 1973. The test of our actual dedication and sincerity to serve the spiritual master will be in the mutual cooperative spirit to push on this movement and not make factions and deviate. That's a very direct statement, and you could say That's very heavy. I'll read it again. The test of our actual dedication and sincerity to serve the spiritual master will be in the mutual cooperative spirit to push on this movement and not make factions and deviate. Wow. The test of our sincerity and dedication is to cooperate. That's heavy, isn't it? Isn't it? Maybe you should make a t-shirt. The test of our actual dedication and sincerity. So what does that mean? Like the test of if we're really sincere and dedicated is if we'll cooperate. So I see this and similar statements of Prabhupada, like Prabhupada's basically begging us. It's like begging us, you have to do this. And this is the test, because if we don't do this, we fail as a mission. And if we fail as a mission, we failed Prabhupada. Even if you're chanting Hare Krishna, but the mission fails, then you failed Prabhupada. So if we, it's a delicate, ISKCON's a delicate entity, and it has a certain culture it needs to maintain to be vital and alive. And this is really essential to understand. Mutual cooperative spirit to push on this movement and not make factions. Okay, so sometimes we explain that I may not agree with you, but I don't make a faction. And it's okay, you do that. I'll go here, or I won't engage. I won't, I've given you my opinion, but you don't want it, so I won't create some faction. I'll go here and preach, in the way I think is best. We won't create divisions and factions. We won't fight. So even if we disagree, we find our place. Okay, I'll go here and you go here, but we're not going to fight. And the thing we also have to understand, that many, many devotees have noticed this reality, that if we publicly demonstrate as leaders not getting along, or if we publicly demonstrate as leaders getting along, just think of the effect it has on the people under us. And so many, many, many devotees and many, many leaders have told me, when leaders get along, we feel, when leaders get along, it inspires younger people. Younger people have told me, when we see that you leaders are getting along, it has a very positive effect on us. So I think that's important to consider. This is feedback from devotees who see leaders getting along and say how much it helps them, and vice versa. And it's confusing if leaders don't get along, and then we're supposed to get along, and then devotees see, well, you're senior devotee, you're not getting along. It's not only confusing, it's disturbing. Not only confusing and disturbing, it's discouraging. So that's something else we have to keep in mind, especially if you're a leader, that you want to set an example, and we're asking other people to cooperate, and we have to set that example. Okay, listen to this one. This letter was written 6 days after the letter we just read. The whole world is going to hell, and everyone is suffering. In light of this, how can we argue amongst one another and neglect our responsibilities for reclaiming these fallen souls, for going back home, back to God? I'm sure many of you have thought like this when you see some debate online or some controversy or some criticism. And generally there's always a devotee who will eventually make this comment, we're wasting energy attacking one another, we should be out giving Krishna to others. Have you ever seen a comment like that? Yeah, that's what Prabhupada's saying. Whole world's going to hell, and everyone is suffering. In light of this, how can we argue amongst, it's like there's a fire department comes up and you go, who's going to take the hose? I'm not taking it. Well, it's your duty. Well, I did it last time. And the house burns down while they're fighting. Something like that. Hare Krishna. How can we neglect our responsibility for reclaiming these fallen souls, for going back home, back to Godhead? Srila Prabhupada once told a devotee that if he did not like what the others were doing, he should set the example. Prabhupada severely chastised him for simply criticizing and not pushing forward ISKCON. So, Prabhupada was very practical, very, very practical. And this is an example of his practicality. He's practically looking at how ISKCON's going to succeed. And he's saying, this is foolish that you're arguing with one another. This is like impractical for an organization to succeed. And this other practical example we just read here, same point. I'm a little tired. Yeah. You're sitting around criticizing when you should be out pushing on the movement. And the other point, we've made this before, if you don't like what someone else is doing, then do it the way you would like them to do it. Like, okay, I don't like what you're doing. Okay, well, be the example. Yeah, like a lot of times, we learn from others when they do something wrong, because we learn that we should not do it that way, because we were hurt by it, or in some way we could see it was not the proper way to act. And so we make a note, and then we think, what would be the proper way to act? And instead of condemning them or criticizing them, we act that way ourselves. That's the idea. That's nice to remember, right? So, if you see somebody doing something and you don't like it, then try to remember this. Okay, let me act the way I want them to act. Let me be the way I like them to be. That would be nice, right? Then other people's faults would inspire you to be better. I can't change them, so let me set an example. Okay, let's see what we have here. Seema had a long day. No, I just ate too much for lunch. That's what I'm tired. I had a long month, not a long day. Today was not a good day. The month was hard. I've been in Australia for a month. They gave me no mercy. They totally exploited me, nonstop. Okay. How to process the situation when we see that devotees are not getting along, especially Prabhupada disciples. There are frictions between Prabhupada disciples also, although they believe they're trying to cooperate. Well, we're human beings. Human beings may not see things eye to eye. And sometimes we're instructed that when we see two seniors not getting along, we should just think this is like achintya, inconceivable. You can't understand it. They're definitely both trying to serve Prabhupada, that's for sure. And they're definitely both sincere. And they definitely, as individuals, see things in individual ways. They just happen to disagree. And maybe their weakness is that once that point of disagreement comes, they don't know how to function well together. But at least what I try to do is always remember they're both sincerely trying to serve Prabhupada. That's the main thing. And then as individuals, they will see things differently, and that, it's not like everyone has to agree with one another. I can serve in a particular way, you can serve in another way. And we can respect that, as long as it's not against our principles or against our philosophy, then we can respect that. I think part of the problem is, if someone doesn't agree with me, then I think they're deviant. I think they're not representing Prabhupada. And that may be true. In most cases, it's probably not. It's just that I'm inflexible. And I think Krishna consciousness is one-dimensional. And if you're not in that dimension, I think you're not following Prabhupada. That's very limited. And that also would put me on a pedestal as the one who understands Siddhanta better than anybody. Because if you don't agree with me, you're not following Prabhupada. But that's a little proud, isn't it? I would be cautious about having that attitude. As long as we remain humble, then we can disagree, but we wouldn't fight. And if two senior devotees are fighting, we just have to think they're both sincerely trying to serve Prabhupada. And that's a fact. And they're just, I don't know, maybe they're the kind of people that just need to be right and they don't want to acquiesce at all. Yeah, it's a reality that we will see Krishna conscious differently because we're individual. And that's okay. Krishna consciousness is not confined to one point of view. Just like, you hear many classes, they're not all exactly the same because people are seeing it through their own experience and their own realizations. And certainly there's room for more than one realization. And, sometimes we might say, I don't agree with it, but we can respect that it's that person's realization. Based on their service, based on their understanding of the philosophy, this is the realization they have. Unless it's, unless it's obviously off, which in most cases it wouldn't obviously be off because they're experienced devotees and they're thoughtful and they're thinking about things. And it may also be that I misunderstand them and I jump to conclusions. And it may also be I'm limited and intolerant as well. But generally we're instructed don't take sides. Because if you take sides, what do? Commit offense to the other side. Let's say I say something you like, someone else criticizes me for what I said, and you think that what they said is foolish. So then, in order to defend me, you'll say how wrong they are, or how foolish they are, or how bad they are, and then you end up offending them. So that's why it said don't take sides. Just don't worry about it. Obviously it's a sensitive issue if your guru is being criticized, but many spiritual masters will never try to retaliate when they're criticized. They just don't say anything. And I think that's an example for their disciples. Just don't get into it. It's not our culture. It's not really our culture it's not our culture to defend ourselves. Of course, if your guru is being criticized, you should defend him. But if he's being criticized by another guru, then if you want to defend him, just don't offend that guru who criticized him. Then you're adding, what do they say? 2 wrongs don't make a right. So, anyway, it's a strange question. It's not a common occurrence. It does happen, but not commonly. Not a strange question, but a question that applies only in specific situations. What about a situation when devotees are offensive sometimes? In the case, the best situation is to avoid, yeah. But how to not keep grudge in the heart? Yeah. You mean they're offending you? How not to keep a grudge? Or they're offending a dear god brother or sister? How not to keep a grudge? Well, yeah, we want to be out of the firing range of an offensive devotee. That's for sure. We don't want to give our ears to that offense. But if we happen to hear it, and they're offending someone that's dear to us, then you say, how not to hold a grudge? Well, you could say a grudge is like a subtle offense to them. And a grudge has no redeeming value for you. So it's always best to let go of the past. Hard sometimes. And sometimes we will need to defend that devotee, because that's also, if that devotee is being criticized falsely, blasphemed falsely, if stories are made up about it and you know it's not true, it may be advisable that you come to the aid of that devotee and defend him. Usually devotee won't want to defend himself. So that could also be a policy. Not that you hold a grudge, but you do your service. Well, naturally, if a senior devotee that's dear to you is offended, you're going to be upset, and you're going to be upset with that devotee. And you'll have to, every situation is different, so you'll have to see how you're going to deal with it. General principle is we should defend devotees who are being criticized for something they didn't do. We should try to defend them without offending those we're defending them from. That's the trick. And that's a difficult trick sometimes. Just keep chanting. The grudge will go away. One senior devotee has really hurt me so much and cheated me, taking advantage of my vulnerable situation. I take it as purification, but hurts. So just go to my website and take my Forgiveness Online course. That will help you deal with it. You know, ultimately, what we're trying to learn in Krishna consciousness is when something like that happens, and it's unjust and it's wrong, maybe terrible, maybe horrible. You know, it's like we're like put up against the wall to test our patience, to test our forgiveness, and to test our ability to accept a situation. And it's not easy. Nobody said it was going to be easy. There also may be recourse if you really think the situation needs rectifying, to go to the GBC or go to some seniors or ISKCON Resolve or somewhere to try to resolve the situation. That can be there. But it's a bit of a trap. Somebody hurts you, then you get upset, then you hate them, then you hold a grudge. And now you're giving back to them, maybe silently, but you're giving back to them a similar consciousness, similar energy that they gave to you. So it doesn't resolve anything. You know, letting go of a grudge is what I would call emotional detachment. You have gross detachment, and then you have subtle detachment. And subtle detachments are all these thoughts and emotions we have to give up. And sometimes it's harder to give up those and give up the gross thing, isn't it? Like, okay, I gave up eating potato chips at midnight. All right, that was hard, but I did it. How did I do it? I went to bed at 10 o'clock. That solved the whole problem. Okay, that wasn't that hard. But to give up anger towards someone that hurt you, that's hard. But we have to learn how to do it. It's part of the detachment. Otherwise you carry that with you, and it contaminates you. And now, for their fault, you're punishing yourself. So they did something wrong, and because you're allowing yourself to hold on to that, you're punishing yourself for what they did to you. Have you ever heard that statement? Criticizing another person or hating another person is punishing yourself for their faults. So that's ultimately what it is. Isn't it? You're punishing yourself for a mistake that another person made. What I've come to learn and understand, that the best way to live is to let go of everything that is against bhakti and embrace everything that's for bhakti. So even on the emotional level, if it's not helpful for my bhakti, I have to give it up. That's the first two principles of surrender. Accept what's favorable and give up what's unfavorable. So holding on to a grudge is unfavorable. So no matter how difficult it is to give up, that's a principle of bhakti. To give up everything that's unfavorable. I'm angry, it's unfavorable, let it go. I'm critical of this devotee, it's unfavorable, let it go. Now, does that mean I don't do anything? Does that mean I can't try to resolve this situation? Perhaps this devotee will do the same thing to others, and you really feel that you need to do something? Yeah, you can. But don't do it out of spite. Don't do it out of hatred or anger. Then you would be no different than him, and you would be allowing his problem to become your problem. And his action is degrading you. So you're allowing him to degrade. He did something out of tamaguna, and now you're being degraded by his tamaguna, and then you're doing something out of tamaguna. So that's not smart. Yes. These are general instructions. I don't know the specific details. So, should we defend ourselves if we are offended? No. Especially on our back? No. It said we should defend other devotees, yes, but out of humility, not defend ourselves, yes. Do we have the right to defend our good name, especially when we are not guilty? It would depend on, the idea of not defending yourself it's a spiritual principle. So if we're just discussing philosophy, then the answer is no, you don't defend yourself, you defend other people. That's the philosophy. Now, looking into a practical situation, let's say someone said something about me that was making it impossible for me to do my service because people were hearing something that's not true about me. And so no longer would people respect me enough that they'd want to learn from me. No longer would there be a positive attitude towards me, so that my preaching programs would fall apart because nobody would come because everyone had heard something. So in that case, then it may be necessary to speak the truth, rectify the situation in some way, because it's hindering my service, or it may be creating a problem for others who know me, etc. But for my own personal need for recognition and honor, I wouldn't do it. Generally, a devotee would just, whatever. That's what they say. I don't want to try to defend myself for something I didn't do. So you may have to evaluate it in terms of what's necessary. Just like sometimes in Prabhupada's books, he would state criticisms that people levied against him. And he would defend those criticisms. But he was defending philosophy. He wasn't defending himself. It was always in the context of philosophy. People criticize me for doing this, but, and then he would explain the philosophy behind doing it. So why isn't defending himself? He was defending the philosophy. Right? So that's another example. At least that's Prabhupada's example. Sometimes Prabhupada wanted to establish his position to demonstrate that because he followed his spiritual master, he was successful. So he would say, look what I have done because I follow my guru. And look what the others who are criticizing me have done because they didn't strictly follow Srila Bhaktisiddhanta. So they weren't successful. So it looked like he was criticizing them and touting himself, tooting his own horn. But he's making a philosophical point. So that may be another incident in which you so-called defend yourself in order to establish a philosophical point. So someone is condemning you for saying something. So then you explain why you said that. You explain it philosophically. Because if it's a public debate, something that's online, then you want to establish what's right, what's true. So you don't care about defending your name and fame generally, but you want to defend what's right. So you may go into a discussion on that basis. But generally, devotee, if he's criticized, he just doesn't worry about it. Doesn't think about it. Sometimes he may think about it and say, maybe the person who's criticizing me is right. I should listen to what they're saying. I should rectify myself, maybe. So he might do that. But of course, sometimes the critic is the critic who criticizes everyone, and you know that that's his nature. And so to defend yourself would be to play into that game and cause him to become more offensive. Or to defend yourself would give credence to the person's criticisms. So and lastly, from the perspective of a humble Vaishnava, it's not that Vaishnavas defend themselves. So those are ways of looking at it. I don't want to say absolutely you don't defend yourself, because in some situations it may be necessary for various reasons. But that's a case-by-case situation. And, if, let's say, I were criticized for saying or doing something which I believe to be true and I believe to be important for the well-being of other devotees, then I would argue that point. Not trying to defend myself per se, but I would argue that point because I feel it's important for our society, for the future, that what I'm saying be understood. And so people are criticizing me for what I said. So then I will further explain, because I believe it's important for the welfare of the society. So rather than go silent, I will speak. Not out of arrogance or pride, but because of the importance of the topic. So, in every situation, when we're questioning, should we retaliate or not? If we retaliate, we always have to retaliate from a place of Krishna consciousness. Otherwise, it's going to ruin it. Does that make sense? So if you decide to retaliate, not from false ego, not out of vengeance, not out of anger, not out of hatred, but out of duty to others, or out of duty to Siddhanta, or duty to Prabhupada to establish the truth of what Prabhupada taught, or what he wanted, or to clarify what Prabhupada wanted, or to point out a mistake that's being made that's harming devotees, that it needs clarification. But your motive is not to tear anybody down. Your motive is not to defend yourself. Your motive is truth. Your motive is service. So if that's the case, then that would be my criteria. And if that's not involved in what's happening, it's just a very critical person who criticizes everyone, why would you want to defend yourself? That would be a waste of time, wouldn't it? Why would you want to engage that energy, like Prabhupada's saying? Use that energy to preach. Oh yeah, I found the quote. The reason why there is difficulty in a competitive spirit is that everyone wants to be supreme. So that's been my realization through all the challenges that I've had in my life and all the challenges I've had in ISKCON, that when I see something is wrong and I need to correct it, I try to do it in a very sattvic way. So let's say I'm correcting you and you've done something wrong. At the same time, I appreciate everything you've done, but there's one thing you did wrong, and I have to correct you. But I'm not coming from a place of anger or spite or any of that, but from a place of wanting to help, wanting to make the situation better. Like I've often said, Arjuna was, he didn't want to fight, and Prabhupada said, and Krishna had to make him angry to fight, had to get him angry. So then it might sound like, well, it's okay to be angry, especially if you're a Kshatriya. But it's not exactly the kind of anger that we think it is. It's more of a benevolent anger because he was fighting for Dharma. So, and how can we say that? Because one of the qualities of Kshatriyas is that they're forgiving. They fight on dharmic principles. So it wasn't fighting out of a hatred kind of anger. So I think that's important. If you're going to fight for something, make it a dharmic kind of anger. An anger that's not going to harm you or anybody else. But if it harms us or other people, then we're just allowing a situation to degrade us. Is that okay? I don't think there's anything else, is there? If you have any other questions or comments. I am very tired. Yes, I am. How about you? You're not tired because it's earlier for you. Right? Don't punish yourself for someone else's problem. That's such a powerful statement because we do it all the time. I witnessed a situation that one disciple was setting guru against other disciple of the same guru. Yeah, so we'd want to it's our duty to defend devotees when we can. But sometimes you see something that should be rectified, but you may not be in a position to do it, and in trying to do it, you might make it worse. Might agitate more people. So that's a consideration also. Is it like, people's hearts are sensitive. And when we're dealing with relationships, there's a lot of sensitivity there, and it's very easy to say or do the wrong thing. Even you don't intend to. It's just, my personal experience is I tend to deal with people like thinking they're like me. So I may make a joke or, something happens to them, and I'll brush it off, because if it happened to me, I would just laugh at it. I would think, oh, that's stupid, but they're really upset. And so if I say, oh, that's really funny. What do you mean funny? They really hurt me. That makes me sound so insensitive. But if it happened to me, I would just think the devotee who did that was just funny, because he's so wrong, it's funny. But not everyone experiences it that way. So, when you're trying to help a situation, you may do it in a way that would work for you, and it just disrupts other people. So we have to be careful. But definitely, that is a devotional principle, that we should protect other devotees. And, the problem is that a nice devotee becomes a leader, and then when you become a leader, you're in a different position. You yield more authority and power. And some people don't do good in those positions. They could be very nice people and very nice devotees, and in another position they do well, but once they get power, it goes to their head. And so we've seen this many times. And so if you see that, it's nice to remember this is a nice devotee. He wasn't like this before he was given some power, and he's just having a hard time with power. And behind that, the offenses he's making, or his discourteous behavior, or whatever it is this nice devotee that I knew to be just a regular Prabhu, but now under pressure, or because he thinks this is how an authority should act. Maybe he's seen other authorities act. He might become a bully, or he might become insensitive, or he might become very rule and regulation oriented, much more so than he was before. So sometimes we just have to empathize with that situation, that it's not easy to be a leader. When you become a leader, people tear you down. They expect a lot from you, and it's hard. Because you can't always be what everybody wants you to be. And sometimes you'll be criticized for something you couldn't ever imagine anyone would criticize you for in a million years, and they criticize because of their expectations. So, leadership is tough. So, be tolerant with your leaders. Okay, anything else? Okay, well, then we can stop. Yeah, we went more than an hour, so we can stop. You got your money's worth tonight, right? Okay, so I'm going back to Alachua, but I may or may not be able to give class on the weekend. We'll see. I may be in my in-laws' house. But there's one last thing I want to say. Some of these things I've said before, but one of the things that's helped me a lot is that I've been in situations where it was easy to see that a leader was doing something wrong. And maybe if I were doing that, I wouldn't know it was wrong, or I wouldn't notice. But because it's somebody else, it's obvious. And then you see how other people are being hurt. And I always felt that those were moments of instruction for me. Just like I would tell myself, notice this, don't forget this. Because someday you may be in a similar position, and you, being a human, may have a tendency to do the same thing. So take note of this, so if you're ever in that position, don't do what you just saw this devotee do. And so I think if we're all like that, then as the movement grows and we move up the ranks, then those who become leaders will be much more informed or conscious, having seen other leaders who've done good and done bad, and taken note of both the good and bad. And so I have a lot of faith in the next generation of leaders, because they get to see leadership before them and they get to learn from it. Whereas many of the leaders in our movement really didn't get to see much leadership in front of them or get much training. So when we're discussing problems here, and when we see these problems, it's so important we learn from them. So ISKCON doesn't continually commit the same mistakes over and over. And if all of us can learn from them, and then when we're in authority, we act in the way we wish that authority would have acted, then we'll improve. But otherwise, there's a chance, if we don't notice these things, we'll end up doing the same things that we're talking about in this class that we see other people doing. It's possible, because that's the nature of leadership. It ends up like that, right? You end up being the person you were doing the same thing that the person you criticized was doing. So it's really important, because if we understand this, then we can create a better future. And although maybe things have been done a certain way, we might say, wait a minute, this has always been done this way in ISKCON, but I don't think this works. Or maybe it worked then, but it doesn't work now. And so when you're given authority, you do it differently, and you make it better. Okay? That's going to be my suggestion. And I think it's really important. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Go Premanandi. Hare Hare.